Hey, Loren. Good to have you back again for the second part of the interview because I basically messed up the first part with my software getting all wonky on me. So thanks again for taking the time to do the second part again with the Q&A that
Sure.
we had prepared for you.
No problem. I even wore the same shirt.
Yeah, I
Got the
didn't.
same
So
shirt.
we could have totally faked it and made it look like it's totally natural. But yeah, let's not go there.
Yeah.
So I'd like to give you the first question. That was by Mark Vineyard. Starts with Loren is awesome, which we knew, which
Yes.
is we can all agree with that one.
Yes.
My question is recommendations on modifying sports-based striking techniques for a self-preservation environment.
That's a good question, and I get that asked a lot, and you probably do too. A lot of people are locked into a style that's sport-oriented, tournament fighting, tag fighting, that sort of thing. Nothing wrong with that, but some styles are just simply locked into that, and not all those techniques transfer to a reality-based situation on the street. Some do. I still teach some techniques that were good in my tournament days, and I think still work well in the street. But more importantly is the concept behind sport fighting is to get a point, dash in, score a point with a punch or with a kick, and typically the fighter then raises his hand in victory and spins around and turns his back to his opponent and walks away for the judges to raise their flags, hoping all that hullabaloo will make the judges raise the flags. It's a psychological play. It works quite well and has for many, many years in the tournament business. But it's a good way to get a knife in your spine out in the street, turning your back on somebody. So if you're locked into a system that is just sports oriented and it's the only school in town, then you're going to have to take it upon yourself to make it realistic as you can. It's hard to do it by yourself. You can do some training exercises by yourself that are reality based, but it's best to have a partner. And one way to do that is to ask somebody in your class. Is there another guy in your class, another gal in your class who wants to train realistically, and then maybe meet with them away from the school, or if the school lets you meet there on off class days and train on reality based techniques. So where do you get that information? If you don't have that information, you're just going to have to look it up. There's places on YouTube. There's lots and lots of books. Many of Wim and my friends have written some outstanding books and DVDs on the subject. Get those things and study them. And as I said, lots of things on Yahoo. Take those techniques and start applying it to the skill set that you already have. Also start eliminating those tournament-based approaches, the thing I just mentioned, dash in, punch, turn around, raise your arm. Stop doing that. How can you do that? By throwing multiple techniques. Typically tournaments don't score multiple techniques. Some do, not all. What I found in tournaments, if you come in with boom, 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 5, 6 techniques, the judges wave the flags. I didn't see anything clear enough. If you come in with one, boom, then you get the point. So you need to eliminate that single blow approach and come in with multiple techniques and to vital targets. Everything that's illegal in tournaments, add that to your reality-based training. Leg techniques, foot stomps, groin kicks, groin grabs and rips, eye techniques, neck shots, base of the brain, stem back here hits, that sort of thing. Why are they illegal? Because people get hurt too badly from them, which is exactly what you want in the street. So it's more the approach that you take, the concept that you, or the concept, the idea that the way you're going to train, more so than the individual technique. A punch is a punch, a kick is a kick. It's all about how you get it in and do so many times. I teach my students what I call beats of time. If you throw a single technique, turn around and walk away, my punch is one beat at a time. I turn around, there's a half beat in which my opponent can hit me. I walk away, there's another half beat in which my opponent can kick me as I get a little farther away, or in which my opponent can come in and stab me. So what I want to do is I want to fill every beat of time or every half beat of time with my stuff so that My opponent can't get in his stuff. So I'm going to come in, 1, 2, boom, kick, punch, punch. As you move back out, you're still punching, kicking until you're out of range. Don't do that in tournaments. You do that in a real situation. So that's just one idea there.
Yeah, I have a friend, and he's a law enforcement officer as well for many years, and he has this great saying that I like, and it's he says it's never his turn.
Right.
The other guy never gets a turn.
That's good.
At best, he gets the sucker punch. That's his turn, and then it's never his turn again.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the mindset that you were talking about
Right. That's
here.
good. That's a good way to say it.
And for the people that are looking for more information, I mean, you've written a bunch of books on solo training as well.
Mhm.
So if they can't find a partner to work with, there's a bunch of stuff that they can do on their own. We wrote the heavy bag book together, which also has a bunch of solo drills. And you know, creative ways to train on the heavy bag, so that can work for them. And it's like you said, there's a bunch of information out there. I think it's less about which style or which system that you look at for self-defense, as opposed to what you just said is the mindset and the way you practice, and getting rid of those things that are really awesome in a competition, but it doesn't really work in real life. Or there's a story that Lawrence Kane told me, and I think it's actually quite it typifies the problem really well. He says that he works. Don't know if he still does, but he worked for a long time stadium security for football games, and that he was actually he had to subdue a guy who was clearly trained in grappling. And what would happen is that if the guy would get the better of him, or if the situation allowed it, he would tap, and the guy would let him go.
Yeah.
And as soon as he lets him go, Lawrence would grab him and put him in a hole or whatever until the cops show up. So it's one of those things that people really don't understand is reality until it's used against them. And it's not about what you said. It's not about, you know, the this is so dangerous, the stuff that we do, that you can't really practice it or whatever. It's just that real life and sports are different.
Sure.
And there's overlap, but there's a lot of differences as well.
Well, there's a lot to be said for the how you train is how you do kind of thing. And an example I've noted in some books is police officers were practicing takeaways for someone's got a bad guy's got a gun on him, and they practice taking that gun away, and then they hand the gun back to their partner, and then you point the gun at him again and take it away. And a guy got into a situation at a 7-Eleven, walked around the counter, walked around an aisle, and the bad guy drew down on him. The officer snatched the gun away, handed the gun back.
Yeah.
It's how you train. So you got to get out of that mindset. So pay attention to that as you practice your reality-based training. What can affect me negatively as in the way that we're training? Always keep that in mind.
Yeah. And also what I like is when we started, you know, riding together many years ago, one of the things that you taught me, and I think is really crucial piece of information, is that there are no bad techniques, but mainly inappropriate ones. Like, okay, this isn't the good moment in time, and this isn't the right context to use that one, that technique. You better use something else. And even if it's a sports technique or something that you would do in a color or something, it could work, but it needs a specific context. And then you have to look at what are the percentages, what are the odds of you encountering that context. I remember you telling me that one about that jumping front kick you did on a guy to jump over a pool, over a puddle. This week I saw the same thing happen somewhere in Russia. I think it was either a soldier or a police officer who does a jumping front kick on a guy who's fighting with another officer, and the guy goes down. It's a perfect kick. It's not pretty, but it works. Neither one of us would ever teach one of our students, well, you know, practice your jumping front kick for self-defense. But it worked, so you can't say that it didn't work. Would you spend a lot of time training that? No, not really.
I just plugged. I have a book called Self-Defense Against a Dog Attack, and I just plugged it on Facebook. And a guy wrote underneath that he got attacked by a vicious dog, and he won the situation by plunging his hand down the dog's throat.
Yeah.
But another guy, private, texted me and said, "That's wrong. That's crazy. You're teaching that. That's terrible." And I said, "I didn't teach it. It's not in the book. It worked for this guy. Would I recommend that? Never. Did it work for this guy? Apparently."
Yeah.
You know, I did a sankajo, wrist twist, on a guy who had a knife on me one time. I would never teach that. I just reflexively went to that technique. So like I told the guy who texted me, I said, sometimes crazy stuff works. You can't rule it out, So,
Yeah.
doesn't mean you should, count on it all the time, but that's, every once in a while something goofy works.
True. True. Well, I hope that answers Mark's question. I'm going to move on over to the next one, which is from Ori Stein. He says, hey, Loren, you started in traditional martial arts and you took their core and work mainly on freestyle self-defense, attacking vital points. What was the way and process during that time from traditional arts to what you do today? So basically, how did you get to the vital points part?
Sure. Well, a lot of people think I was in traditional martial arts for a long time. I've been training for 51 years as of today. I was in the traditional arts for 2. So that was my foundation art. It gave me a lot of core quality techniques. What happened is I started in a style called Kong Sudo, which is a Korean Japanese style. They had the pinyon forms, just like the Japanese do, and lots of hard blocking and that kind of stuff. When I went into service, I was in a stateside for a couple of years. Then I went to Vietnam for a year, where I worked as a military policeman in Saigon. Very, very rough city. And there were times I got in multiple fights per shift. Each shift was 12 to 14 hours long. It wasn't uncommon to get into 5 or 6 beefs, sometimes just push-ups, sometimes all-out brawling. What I found is the techniques just weren't, my punches were good. We didn't have everything so PC now with police work. In those days, we just punched, but my punches were good. Is some of the blocks and some of the other stylized things, I just couldn't get them to work for me. So when I got out of the service and got home, I said, I've got to change my way of training, because the traditional stuff doesn't work. If I jump ahead 10 years or so, I came to the realization that traditional stuff works. My traditional stuff didn't. I've seen some amazing traditional martial artists that I would take into the most evil of places, but my stuff wasn't working. But so what I did, go back to what I got out of the service, I got into the police department. Right away, they sucked me into training police self-defense. And I did that for 24 of my 25 years on the police department. And because my mindset at that time was everything reality-based, everything that works, that slowly, or maybe it was quickly, I don't remember that far back now, but it evolved into my regular martial art training and my school training. And we slowly started getting rid of the tournament stuff and started evolving more and more into reality-based training ideas. Somewhere along in there is probably the late 80s, I started thinking about vital targets. In tournaments, you just throw a punch into the torso, you get a red flag, and you walk away thinking that would have killed a guy. In reality, it probably wouldn't have bothered him. But so I started thinking more about vital targets, specific targets on the body that debilitate, that cause excruciating pain, crippling pain, even unconsciousness. So I started just with the head, and I kind of focused on the head for a while, and to the point where I came out with a DVD with Paladin Press called Vital Targets, and it's all about ways to hit the head and finding openings, finding pathways, taking advantage of those pathways from all kinds of directions. That evolved later into looking at even more vital targets all over the body. I'm not just talking about pressure points. A lot of people say pressure point control doesn't work. Well, their pressure point control doesn't work, because it does work. It worked for me for years on the PD and all the officers we use. You have to use a little common sense. If some guy's coming at you with a tree branch, you're not going to, press his cheekbone. There's time and a place for the pressure points, but they do work on some people, not everybody. Not drunks and crazy people and mental people who are impervious to pain, but they do work. So I'm not just talking about pressure points, I'm talking about things that just really hurt when you hit them: the liver, the kidneys, the eyes, the brainstem, the brachial plexus on the side of the neck, the vagus nerve, the groin, of course, the bladder. You kind of introduced me to hitting the bladder. We talked about that several years ago with that bicycle kick thing you do with, like pedaling a bicycle, but you can also punch down into it. Even a light punch can be really debilitating to your partner in class, so be careful of that. It really compresses these nerves and you get this funny feeling all over your body. You don't know if you're going to puke or go to the bathroom, and which end you're going to do that out of. And then lots of targets, vital targets on the legs and the knee points and the shins and the ankles and fingers and biceps and triceps and all that kind of stuff. So I started putting all that together and did a couple of books and a DVD on that. But the idea I had on that was I'm not going to stay young and handsome, although the handsome has stayed, but I'm not going to stay young and handsome and strong and fast forever. So I need something that can cause debilitations very quickly, even though I don't have the strength that I used to have. So that's kind of the basis behind that. And so we've been doing that, we meaning my class and I, and some of the things I've written on for about 10, 15 years. One of the books I did was called Fighting the Pain-Resistant Attacker. The pain-resistant attacker. He's resistant because he's drunk, he's high on drugs, he's a mental case, he's morbidly obese or heavily muscular. And so I worked with a third-degree Taekwondo medical doctor on that. He's in the Army and stationed in Afghanistan. We swapped 1 million emails and texts, and he helped me with that book, narrowing down certain targets that can debilitate quickly, even though the recipient can't feel the blow.
Yeah.
So that's been really interesting to me, and I continue to kind of research that and look into it.
I'll put a link to the books in the video in the episode guide so that people can get that. So that's Ori's question. I've got 2 more, well actually 3 more questions. 2 of them are from Riz Stably. First question he asks is, how true is the stat that 90% of the fights end up on the ground?
That old saw, that's been around so long. The first time I heard it was in about 1989, 1990. And I was working street gangs at the time and getting into a lot of beefs. That's beef, like in hamburger beef. Please call it beef, not fights. But and some of these beefs where the guy just resisted. Some of the beefs, the guys are just all out flailing. And in my experience, 90% didn't go to the ground. I don't know, maybe 20% went to the ground, and that was because and my partners and I took the guy to the ground, because it's easier to handcuff somebody when their mobility is limited. So I asked some other officers that were real aggressive officers out in the field, worked real high crime areas, and they go, no, that's ridiculous. I never heard of that. So that doesn't mean it's not true, but then you have to ask yourself, who says? Whenever you hear these ridiculous, no, I wouldn't say, whenever you hear these comments from people, a knife fighter would never attack that way. 90%, I've even heard higher percents of fights go to the ground. A drunk would never swing that way. A guy with a gun would never do that. Ask, how do you know that? Where does it say that? Is there something written on that? Did somebody do a study? Were there people making notations on every fight that happens in a back alley and in bars? No. Somebody came up with that. My own theory is that somebody came up with it who just wrote a book on grappling on the ground, or a DVD on grappling on the ground. So, but yeah, fights do go to the ground, and you should have some skill down there. But the bottom line is, my point is, don't believe every blanket statement, generality that you hear, because by virtue of the name generality, it's just not true. And where are they getting the information? So
yeah, the part of it that I researched is that it's as far back as I can see, it's really started with the Gracies when they started with promoting their brand of jiu-jitsu, and that they cited one of an LAPD study that was done. I think it was Sergeant Greg Dossey who did that on basically all the different kinds of use of force, and I think it was about 65% of the use of force incidents ended on the ground, but it was more complex than that. He broke it down into 5 categories of use of force, and what kicked it off was like The officer tries to arrest somebody and the guy pulls away, or he runs away, or he attacks, or he pushes the officer, or whatever. He had 5 different categories, and in one of those categories, it ended up on the ground. So it was a lot more complex than that statistic of saying, like, 90% goes to the ground. It's not. It's like you said. First of all, it's not true, and second, it doesn't represent that study well. On the contrary, when you look at that actual study that the guy did, it says something very, very more, both different and a lot more nuanced. So yeah, it's marketing and stuff like that, and
Sure.
which doesn't mean that you don't have to know how to fight on the ground, but so 90% is pretty big number.
Yeah, it's a huge number. And every time I've said that, every once in a while I'll go on the internet and do an ego check. Usually it's a shattering ego check to see what people are saying about some of my comments. And people will say, Christensen says, no fights go to the ground.
Yeah.
How did you get from there to what I said to there? Just use some common sense. Should you train on some ground skill? Of course. You should train on some ground skill. Train to get up. Train to do what you got to do to get up. I saw a video the other day of a police officer. He's in looks like a kind of a low rent area in the city. And he's got a guy that he's hell bent on restraining on the sidewalk. And he's surrounded by the bad guy's peers. And they're all coming in, giving him shots in the liver and punching him and kicking him and hitting him over the head. And the cop continues to try to restrain this guy. That's what happens sometimes what happens when you're a grappler is you get totally focused on my grappling and figure. One of those guys could have had a knife, a bottle, a metal bar or whatever, and whacked him. He just lucked out. And then the guy finally, I think they grabbed his foot and they pulled the cop away. The bad guy got up and the cop got up and chased after the bad guy. What about dealing with these people who are interfering? What about backing off and calling for cover? But we just can't get so focused on one thing. You talk to a Taekwondo guy, all fights involve kicks. You talk to your Gracie Jiu-Jitsu guy, of course, that's where they're comfortable on the ground, so fights go to the ground. So there's so many variables involved to make a blanket statement on any of this stuff. It's just ridiculous. When I write, I use what I call qualifiers. I'll say, most fighters find that. Some karate men do this. Several jiu-jitsu fighters have found that. So you put qualifiers in there and just leave those blanket statements alone because typically they're not right.
Yeah, it's more honest that way as well because it's so easy to rent whatever position and say like this is the way it is and represent that as if it's the ultimate truth where everybody who has a little bit of experience with violence knows that it's a big wide world out there and you don't know anything. Right. A while ago I had a discussion with somebody says nobody attacks that way, nobody.
Sure.
Somebody on my Facebook page posted something along the lines of that defense against a push or a shove. It's nonsense, doesn't work, nobody attacks that way. If I had even $50 for every time I saw a fight start because somebody did a double hand push or one hand push, I'd be a rich man. Yeah. But maybe it doesn't happen where he hangs out or in the circle of people that he runs in. That is uncommon. But it's just it's so easy to get locked into what you see and think that is the whole of reality, where actually it's a lot more complex than that. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a good point to end the 90% question. Okay, Loren, so I've got the second part of the question that came from Ristabile is what principles should be considered for multiple attacker scenarios?
Well, the best answer is probably the boring one, and that is don't get yourself in that situation in the first place. Typically, people they'll see a cluster of suspicious-looking people around, say, the 7-Eleven, and they're going in there for some reason, and they'll just wade through the people and then wonder later, well, how did I get into that situation? How did I get into that fight? If you see something that raises the hair on the back of your neck, listen to it. It's very valuable information. What your sixth sense is telling you, listen to it and go someplace else. It's the same thing if you're walking down the street and you see a cluster of drunks or thugs of some kind down at the corner on the same sidewalk you're on. simply cross the street rather than to walk into the midst of that. Uh, yeah, you got to swallow a little pride and maybe a little indignation, and you're right to walk where you want to, but you may have an issue there with those guys that could affect your life for a long, long time, lawsuits and injury and all that kind of stuff. Just cross the street and go about your business, and you'll soon feel okay about it. As far as physically confronting multiple attackers, the old saw is still of value. Try to stack them, and that means don't deal with 3 or 4 people surrounding you, or what's typically called a triangle. I'm dealing with this guy, and I'm at a point of the triangle. Try to stack them so you're just dealing with one person at a time. That means you're going to have to be quick on your feet to constantly move about. Unless these guys are the dumbest guys ever, they're not going to stay in a line. They're going to scatter out and keep moving around, trying to get around you. So you're going to have to quickly move about to try to get them stacked as well as possible. And as you do that, look for an avenue of escape. Don't stay there to fight these guys if you don't have to. Look for that avenue of escape. As soon as that, you have 2 things. You have the path of escape, and you have the opportunity. As soon as you have both of those things, run, get out of there as soon as you can. Anything can happen in a group fight. You could get seriously injured, killed, or you could seriously injure or kill someone, and then your whole life, as you know it right now, changes, and you're going to be involved in lawsuits, possible arrests, and all kinds of problems down the line. So get out of there as quickly as you can.
All right. I think that's a really good answer. And then I've got a final question from Ian Hogan. Wim, politely ask him when he's getting off his ass and writing a new novel.
Yeah, getting off my sorry ass to write that novel. Actually, I have. I've written 5 novels. They are all called dukkha, D-U-K-K-H-A. It's a Pali word, and it means to suffer. And each novel is called dukkha, but it all has a different subtitle and a different cover. The 5th novel is now not out yet. It hasn't been edited. It's still at the publisher, and I don't know when that's going to happen. And I've been working on short stories, one called Old Ed, Old Ed 1, Old Ed 2, Old Ed 3. And I'm also going to start working on some short stories that relate to a book, a nonfiction book that came out a few months ago called Cops True Stories of the Paranormal. It's a very hot-selling book, and I want to do some fiction short stories based on real incidents that happened in that book.
All right, sounds great. That's all I had for the questions. So any parting words that you want to give to the audience?
The only thing I can say is there seems to be an awful lot of ugliness going on in the martial art world on YouTube and on Facebook, and everybody being critical, and people saying that will never work in the street, that old saw. And maybe just encourage everyone to be kind to each other. We're all on this journey together. We're all at different stages. Some people have been on it for 2 months. I've been doing it for 51 years. You never know where that individual is going to go in his martial art endeavor. So just give everybody a break. Sure, you're better than everybody else, but just let them have their trip right now, and just back off on all the negative, critical comments, and let everybody enjoy their journey in the martial arts.
All right, that's a pretty positive note to end this on. Where can people reach you? Website, Facebook, or anything else?
I'm on Facebook under my name, and on my website is WWLWC Books. It's my initial, LWC, and books.com. My books are on there. They're all signed. People come to my website because they want a signed book, or if you don't care about a signed book, you can get it on Amazon, the usual bookstores.
All right, excellent. Well, Loren, thanks again for all your patience and helping me out with the interview, and we'll talk again soon then.
All right, very good. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. And now we come to the end of the second part of the interview. Once again, thanks to Loren for taking the time to do all the different tries we had to do for the interview due to the technical issues. If you enjoyed it, so please subscribe via YouTube. Then you get all the updates when there's a new episode of my webcast going live. You can also check out my blog or main site, and there's some more information there. I will put up all the links in the episode guide, both here on YouTube in the description and on my blog. You'll see it on the page there as well, so you can check out everything we talked about. There's more to come. I've obviously got a bunch more interviews planned with people I'll get to eventually, and also some more webcasts where I take questions and so on. So I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to share this with everybody who might be interested, and I'll talk to you soon.